In the beam of sunlight cutting through the attic window, the dust motes danced. That peculiar grime that only comes from handling decades-old papers stained my hands, a mix of dust, deteriorating ink, and the oils from countless fingers that had touched these documents before me. Having spent the past 3 weekends sorting through what remained of my grandmother's belongings after her funeral, I was exhausted. But I was also the only one in the family who cared enough to preserve our history. They called me the family archivist. A title I had once worn with pride. I should explain how it all started. When my grandmother Eleanor passed away 2 months ago at the age of 92, she left behind a Victorian house filled with nearly a century of memories. My parents, aunts, and uncles were eager to sell the property, but they agreed to give me time to sort through her personal effects first. "Take what matters," my father had said with a dismissive wave. "The rest goes to donation or trash." What they didn't understand was that everything mattered. Every letter, photograph, and trinket told a story. Our story. The thought of our family history being scattered to the winds or buried in some landfill was something I couldn't bear. So, I took a leave of absence from my job as a museum conservator and set to work. At first, the process had been relatively straightforward. I catalogued furniture, packaged heirloom jewelry, and organized decades of photo albums. My grandmother had been meticulous about labeling most things, which made my job easier. But then I discovered the attic and the 27 cardboard boxes stacked neatly against the far wall, each labeled simply with a year ranging from 1925 to 1975. A treasure trove of our family's past was contained in those boxes: letters between my great-grandparents during World War I, my grandfather's medical school notebooks, newspaper clippings about local events involving family members, birth announcements, wedding invitations, funeral programs, the documentation of lives lived, of connections made and broken. I was down to the final box, labeled 1975 in my grandmother's precise handwriting. It looked different from the others. The cardboard was newer, the sealing tape tighter. While the other boxes had shown signs of being opened occasionally over the years, this one appeared untouched since it had been sealed. Strange, considering my grandmother had lived another 47 years after 1975. "Last one," I muttered to myself, pulling out my box cutter. "Then I can finally get some sleep." With a satisfying rip, the blade sliced through the yellowed packing tape. I pulled back the cardboard flaps, expecting to find more of the same letters and photos, perhaps some memorabilia from the mid-70s. Instead, sitting on top of a stack of cassette tapes, I found a single leather-bound journal. The journal's cover was unmarked except for a small symbol embossed into the lower right corner, a circle containing what appeared to be a stylized eye. I ran my finger over it, feeling the indentation in the leather. As I opened it, the binding cracked slightly, suggesting it had remained closed for a very long time. The first page contained only a date, June 3, 1975, and a short line in my grandmother's handwriting: "I've decided to record everything. God forgive me, but someone needs to know the truth." Frowning, I flipped through the pages. Unlike my grandmother's usual neat penmanship, this writing was hurried, sometimes barely legible. The journal was filled with pages of frantic scrawls, diagrams, and what looked like transcribed conversations. Occasionally, taped to a page was a newspaper clipping or photograph with annotations in the margins. I turned back to the box and examined one of the cassette tapes. Each was labeled with a date, all from the summer of 1975. No other information, no indication of their contents. I set them aside for later, returning my attention to the journal. Something about its desperate tone made me uneasy, but I couldn't stop reading. "My dear Eleanor," the first entry began, "was always the sensible one in the family. She kept our feet on the ground when Father's wild theories threatened to carry us away. But even she cannot deny what we found beneath the Blackwood property. The entrance was exactly where the old maps indicated it would be." I stopped reading, confused. This wasn't my grandmother's journal. She was Eleanor. This was written about her. I checked the inside cover and found a name I recognized: Margaret Blackwood. My grandmother's sister. My great-aunt Margaret, the one who had disappeared in the summer of 1975. My heart began to beat faster. The family never spoke about Aunt Margaret. The few times I'd asked as a child, I was told she had moved away suddenly and lost touch with the family. A falling out over inheritance, my mother had claimed once. A nervous breakdown, according to my uncle. But here was her journal, hidden away in my grandmother's attic for almost 50 years. The light from the attic window had shifted, casting long shadows across the dusty floorboards. I should have stopped then, packed everything away, and taken it home to examine in the comforting light of day. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight. The harsh white beam illuminated the pages as I continued to read. June 10, 1975. We've been excavating for 3 days now. Eleanor thinks we should stop, that we're desecrating hallowed ground. She doesn't understand that what lies beneath the old chapel isn't sacred. It's something else entirely. Father's research was correct. The symbols carved into the stone match those in his manuscripts exactly. Tomorrow we break through the final wall. A chill ran through me despite the summer heat that had made the attic stifling all day. I'd never heard anything about an excavation or an old chapel on family land. The Blackwood property had been sold decades ago, shortly after my great-grandfather's death in the late 70s. I'd driven past it once, just an ordinary suburban development now, rows of cookie-cutter houses where a large estate had once stood. I flipped ahead several pages, landing on an entry from late June. The handwriting here was even more erratic, the pen having torn through the paper in places. They're watching us now. I can feel their eyes when I turn my back on the entrance. Eleanor refuses to return to the site, says she's having nightmares. David thinks we should seal it up, but it's too late for that. They know we've found them. The recording from last night captured their voices exactly as Father described them. Not human, not even close. Accompanying this entry was a roughly drawn floor plan of what appeared to be underground chambers with notations about ceiling height, air quality, and temperature readings. In the center of the largest chamber, Aunt Margaret had drawn another symbol, similar to the eye on the journal's cover but more elaborate, with what looked like tendrils extending outward from the pupil. My hands were trembling now. I set the journal down and reached for one of the cassette tapes labeled simply June 28, 1975. I had no way to play it. Who still had cassette players these days? I made a mental note to find one online or perhaps a service that could digitize the recordings. I returned to the journal, skipping ahead to July. The entries here were shorter, more fragmented. July 4th, Independence Day. The irony isn't lost on me. We're anything but independent now. They speak through David sometimes. His voice changes. Eleanor won't admit what's happening, but I've seen the fear in her eyes. The thing wearing David's face isn't David anymore. July 8, Eleanor destroyed Father's manuscripts today. Said it was the only way to stop this. She doesn't understand that it's too late. They're already here, already among us. I've hidden my recordings and notes where she won't find them. Someone needs to know the truth. July 10th. I hear them in the walls at night, whispering my name, making promises. David disappeared yesterday. Eleanor says he simply left, that he was afraid of what we'd discovered. She's lying. I saw her speaking to him this morning, but it wasn't him anymore. Not really. I flipped through the remaining pages quickly, my unease growing with each entry. The writing became increasingly paranoid, with references to Watchers and the Awakened Ones. Aunt Margaret described visions of cosmic entities and ancient pacts interspersed with mundane notes about neighbors acting strangely and phone calls where no one spoke on the other end. The final entry was dated August 17, 1975. They're coming for me tonight. I can no longer trust anyone, not even Eleanor. Especially not Eleanor. I've left everything I know in this journal and the recordings. If you're reading this, it's already too late for me, but perhaps not for you. Look for the signs. They're everywhere once you know to see them. The eye that watches from between the stars. The voice that calls from beneath the earth. They've been waiting for so long, and now they're finally awake. The journal ended there. No resolution, no explanation of what happened to Aunt Margaret. Just paranoid ramblings and cryptic warnings. I sat back on my heels, exhaling slowly. Family legend had it that Margaret suffered a nervous breakdown and eventually took her own life, though no one ever spoke of it directly. Reading her journal, I could see why they believed that. These were clearly the writings of someone experiencing a serious mental health crisis, delusions, paranoia, possibly hallucinations. Yet, something about it nagged at me. Why had my grandmother kept these materials hidden away for decades? If Margaret had simply been ill, why not discard these painful reminders of her breakdown? And what was the excavation she referred to? Had there really been something beneath the old Blackwood property? I gathered the journal and tapes, placing them carefully in my backpack. The rest of the box contained only newspaper clippings about local disappearances in the summer of 1975, 5 people in total, including my great-aunt Margaret and someone named David Cohen, who I assumed was the David mentioned in the journal. It was nearly dark by the time I locked up the house. As I drove home, Margaret's final words echoed in my mind. Look for the signs. They're everywhere once you know to see them. I shook my head, dispelling the thought. My great-aunt had clearly been suffering from delusions. There were no signs, no cosmic entities, no ancient awakened ones, just the sad documentation of a mind coming undone. I was wrong, of course. So terribly wrong. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the contents of that final box. I ordered a cassette player online and anxiously awaited its arrival. While I waited, I continued to pore over the journal and newspaper clippings, creating a timeline of events from the summer of 1975, trying to separate fact from my aunt's increasingly paranoid interpretations. What I knew for certain, my great-grandfather, Edward Blackwood, died in April 1975. My grandmother, Eleanor, and her sister, Margaret, inherited the family estate. According to the journal, they discovered something beneath the property in early June, something related to their father's research. By mid-July, a man named David had disappeared. By mid-August, Margaret herself was gone. The newspaper articles confirmed that 5 people went missing that summer within a 10-mile radius of the Blackwood property. None were ever found. The police had considered the possibility of a serial killer, but with no bodies and no evidence, the cases eventually went cold. I needed more information. While waiting for the cassette player to arrive, I decided to visit the County Historical Society, hoping to find records of the Blackwood estate and any structures that might have existed on the property. Perhaps there really had been a chapel, as Margaret mentioned. The Historical Society was housed in a converted Victorian mansion not unlike my grandmother's home. The archivist, a woman in her 60s named Helen, was delighted to help when I explained I was researching my family history. Blackwood, she repeated, eyes lighting up. Oh my, that's one of our oldest families. The estate was quite something in its day. Let me see what we have. She disappeared into the archives and returned with several folders and a rolled-up architectural drawing. The original estate was built in 1878 by your great-great-grandfather. I believe it was quite extensive, the main house, servant quarters, stables, and yes, a small chapel. The family was quite religious, apparently. She unrolled the architectural plans on a large table. There it was, a small stone chapel situated at the far edge of the property near what was labeled as the Old Woods. A separate, smaller drawing showed the chapel's floor plan, including what appeared to be a crypt beneath it. Was there any record of who was buried in the crypt? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Helen frowned. Not that I know of. The chapel fell into disuse sometime in the early 1900s. I believe the crypt was sealed after a case of vandalism in the 1920s. She studied my face. Is there something specific you're looking for? I hesitated, then pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of the symbol from Aunt Margaret's journal, the eye within a circle. Have you ever seen this symbol before? I found it among my grandmother's things. Helen squinted at the screen, then went very still. Where did you say you found this? In my grandmother's papers. It was on a journal from 1975. She handed back my phone quickly, as if it had burned her. I've seen it before. Yes. It's not something we discuss much around here. She lowered her voice. It was associated with a rather unusual religious group that existed in this area in the late 1800s. They called themselves the Watchers of the Void. Most considered them a harmless, eccentric cult, but there were rumors. Unpleasant rumors. My skin prickled. What kind of rumors? Helen glanced around, though we were alone in the reading room. Disappearances. Rituals in the woods. The usual sort of thing small towns whisper about outsiders. They disbanded after their leader died under mysterious circumstances in 1920. That's the official story, anyway. And unofficially? She shook her head. Just small-town gossip. Not worth repeating. She began gathering up the materials. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I sensed she wasn't going to tell me more, so I changed tactics. Yes, actually. Do you have any information about disappearances in the area during the summer of 1975? I found some newspaper clippings among my grandmother's things. Helen's hand stilled. 1975, she repeated softly. Yes, I remember that summer. I was just a girl, but everyone was frightened. 5 people vanished without a trace. They never found any of them. She looked at me directly. Your great-aunt was one of them, wasn't she? Margaret Blackwood. I nodded. I knew her, you know. Not well, but she used to come in here sometimes, researching local history. She was intense. Especially those last few months. Helen seemed to be weighing her words carefully. She was looking into the same things you are now. The chapel. The Watcher's cult. The symbol. A chill ran down my spine. Did she ever tell you what she found? No. But the last time I saw her, about a week before she disappeared, she was different. Frightened. She kept looking over her shoulder like she thought someone was following her. Helen leaned closer. She left something here, actually. Asked me to keep it safe. Said she'd come back for it, but she never did. My heart began to race. Do you still have it? Helen nodded slowly. I should have given it to the police at the time, I suppose, but she was so insistent that no one else should see it. And then when she vanished. She sighed. Wait here. She disappeared into a back room and returned moments later with a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My aunt's name was written across the front in faded ink. She said if anything happened to her, it should go to someone who was asking the right questions. Helen placed the envelope on the table between us. I think that's you. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. Thank you. Don't thank me, Helen replied, her voice suddenly cold. Whatever Margaret got mixed up in, it destroyed her and the others who disappeared that summer. She gathered the historical materials into a neat pile. My advice? Burn whatever's in that envelope and forget about all of this. Some questions are better left unanswered. But I couldn't do that. I'd come too far already. I waited until I was in my car to open the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a key. The photograph showed 3 people standing in front of what I recognized as the chapel from the architectural drawings. My grandmother Eleanor on the left, looking young and serious. A man I didn't recognize in the middle, David, presumably. And Aunt Margaret on the right, her arm linked with his, smiling broadly. They were standing in front of an open doorway, the entrance to the crypt, I realized. And on the stone archway above them was carved the same symbol from Margaret's journal, the eye within a circle. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in my aunt's handwriting were the words, "The day we found the entrance, May 30th, 1975. God help us all." The key was old and heavy, made of tarnished brass. There was no indication of what it might open, but I had my suspicions. I slipped both items into my pocket and started the car. I needed to see the site of the old chapel for myself. The Blackwood estate had long since been transformed into a suburban development called Oakwood Heights. I drove slowly through the quiet streets, consulting a map I'd created by overlaying the historical property boundaries onto a current map of the area. If my calculations were correct, the chapel would have stood near what was now the far edge of a small community park. I parked and walked through the park, which was mostly empty on the weekday afternoon. A few mothers watched their children on a playground, and an elderly man walked a small dog along a paved path. At the far end, the park gave way to a small wooded area, likely a remnant of the old woods marked on the estate plans. Following my map, I ventured into the trees. The summer heat seemed to intensify here, the air thick and still beneath the canopy. After about 10 minutes of walking, I found what I was looking for, a small clearing where traces of a stone foundation were still visible among the undergrowth. The chapel. I knelt down, brushing away leaves and dirt to reveal the weathered stones. The building itself was long gone, but part of the foundation remained. I made my way around the perimeter, looking for any sign of an entrance to a crypt or underground chamber. At the far side of the clearing, I found a depression in the ground, partially covered by fallen branches and decades of accumulated forest debris. Pushing aside the branches, I discovered a set of stone steps leading downward, now mostly obscured by soil and roots. This had to be the entrance to the crypt. I hesitated, suddenly aware of how foolish this was. I was alone in the woods, about to descend into a forgotten underground chamber based on the paranoid writings of a woman who disappeared nearly 50 years ago. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed at me to turn back. But I had come this far, and I had to know the truth. Using the flashlight on my phone, I carefully made my way down the crumbling steps. The air grew cooler as I descended, with a damp, earthy smell that reminded me of my grandmother's root cellar. At the bottom was a stone archway, now partially collapsed, and beyond it, darkness. I shone my light into the space beyond. It was a small antechamber with walls of fitted stone. At the far end was a metal door, rusted but intact. The keyhole was visible in its center. With shaking hands, I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It slid into the lock with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for me. For a moment, I considered turning back. I could walk away now, forget about all of this, live my life in blissful ignorance. Instead, I turned the key. The mechanism moved smoothly with barely a sound. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a second chamber beyond. As I stepped forward, my flashlight illuminated what appeared to be a small study or library. Shelves lined the walls, still filled with books and manuscripts. A desk stood in the center, papers scattered across its surface as if someone had left in a hurry. Most startling of all, electric lights were mounted on the walls, old fixtures from the 1970s. I found a switch near the door and flipped it, hardly expecting anything to happen. To my shock, the lights flickered to life, casting a warm glow throughout the room. Someone had connected electricity to this underground chamber, and from the lack of dust on the desk and shelves, someone had been maintaining it. My heart pounding, I examined the room more carefully. The books on the shelves were a mix of academic texts on archaeology and ancient religions, alongside older leather-bound volumes whose titles were in languages I didn't recognize, Latin, perhaps, and something that might have been Greek. On the desk lay an open ledger. The last entry was dated August 16, 1975, the day before my aunt's final journal entry. It appeared to be a research log documenting the excavation of chambers beyond this one. According to the notes, they had discovered a series of rooms extending deep beneath the property, culminating in a large central chamber that predated the chapel by centuries. Next to the ledger was a folder containing photographs, black and white images of stone walls covered in strange symbols, narrow passageways, and what appeared to be ceremonial artifacts. In one photo, my aunt stood next to a stone altar, pointing to a carving that matched the eye symbol from her journal. I was so absorbed in examining these materials that I almost missed the sound, a faint shuffling from somewhere beyond the study. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of movement. I wasn't alone down here. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, just as I was convincing myself I had imagined it, a voice responded, distant and muffled, but unmistakably human. "Margaret? Is that you? Margaret? Have you finally come back to us?" The voice was female, elderly, but with a lilting quality that sent chills down my spine. It came from beyond a second door on the far side of the study, a door I hadn't noticed until now. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to get out of this underground chamber and never return. Instead, I found myself moving toward the voice, drawn by a terrible curiosity that overrode my fear. "I'm not Margaret," I called out. "I'm her great-niece." "Who are you?" A soft laugh echoed from beyond the door. "Oh, child. Don't you know? I'm Eleanor. Your grandmother." My blood turned to ice. Impossible. My grandmother had died 2 months ago. I had attended her funeral, seen her body lowered into the ground. "That's not possible," I said, my voice shaking. "My grandmother is dead." Another laugh. This one deeper, less human somehow. "Death is such a limited concept, dear one. We exist beyond its boundaries now. As did Margaret, until she betrayed us. As will you, if you make the right choice." I reached the second door. Metal, like the first, but inscribed with symbols similar to those in the photographs. My hand hovered over the handle. Whatever lay beyond, I knew instinctively that opening this door would change everything. There would be no going back. The cassette player had arrived at my apartment the day before. I had listened to the first of Aunt Margaret's recordings, mostly her narrating her exploration of these very chambers, with occasional comments from my grandmother and the man named David. Nothing supernatural, nothing to suggest the paranoid delusions her journal later contained. But the second tape had been different. It contained what sounded like a ritual of some kind, with chanting in a language I didn't recognize. And beneath the human voices, something else, a low pulsing sound that made my skin crawl and my head ache. I had shut it off after only a few minutes, unable to bear it any longer. Now, standing before this second door, I heard that same pulsing sound, faint but unmistakable, coming from the chamber beyond. "Open the door, child," the voice that claimed to be my grandmother coaxed. "See what we've become. What you could become." My hand closed around the handle. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The new voice came from behind me, causing me to spin around in shock. A woman stood in the doorway to the study, elderly, but straight-backed and strong-looking. She wore hiking clothes and carried a walking stick that looked more like a weapon than a mobility aid. Her face was vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen her before. "Who are you?" I demanded. "A friend of your aunt's," the woman replied, stepping fully into the room. "My name is Helen. We met yesterday, though I look rather different now." I stared in confusion. This couldn't be the same Helen from the Historical Society. That woman had been in her 60s with gray hair and glasses. This Helen was at least 20 years older, with white hair and deeply lined features. "That's not possible," I said. "You're not the same person." Helen smiled grimly. "Time works differently when you're dealing with them. I've been tracking you since you visited me, but it's taken me longer than I expected." She nodded toward the door behind me. "Whatever it's telling you, whatever it's promising, it's lying. That thing isn't your grandmother. From beyond the door, the voice hissed angrily. Don't listen to her. She's trying to keep you from the truth, just as she kept Margaret from us. Helen took a step closer. Your Aunt Margaret figured out what they really were, what they really wanted. That's why she disappeared. Not because they took her, but because I helped her escape. She's been hiding from them ever since. My mind reeled. She's alive. After all this time. For now. Helen glanced nervously at the inscribed door. But they've never stopped looking for her. And now they've found a new way to draw her out. Through you. The pulsing sound from beyond the door intensified, and I felt a pressure building in my head, like the onset of a migraine. The voice that claimed to be my grandmother spoke again, but now it had changed, deeper, resonant, no longer even attempting to sound human. Open the door, child. Fulfill your purpose. I stumbled backward, away from the door, clutching my head. What are they? I gasped. Helen grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. Later. Right now, we need to leave. They're fully awakened now, and the barriers won't hold much longer. As if in response to her words, the inscribed door began to vibrate, the metal groaning under some immense pressure from the other side. The symbols carved into its surface began to glow with a sickly green light. Run! Helen shouted, pushing me toward the outer door. Get to the surface. We fled through the study and into the antechamber, the pulsing sound growing louder behind us, accompanied now by a high-pitched keening that made my teeth ache. I scrambled up the stone steps, Helen right behind me, as the underground chamber filled with blinding green light. We emerged into the forest clearing just as a tremor shook the ground beneath our feet. The depression where the steps had been collapsed in on itself, earth and stones tumbling downward to seal the entrance. For a moment, all was still. Then Helen was pulling me again, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. It won't hold them for long. We need to get as far away as possible. We ran through the woods, branches whipping at our faces, until we reached the park. It was deserted now, though the sun had not yet set. No children on the playground, no dog walkers on the paths. An unnatural silence hung over everything. My car. I panted, pointing toward the parking lot. Helen shook her head. No time. They'll be looking for it. She pulled a set of keys from her pocket. Mine's closer. We hurried to a battered Jeep parked on a side street. Helen unlocked it and practically shoved me into the passenger seat before climbing behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from the park, from the suburban development built atop the old Blackwood estate. Only when we were on the highway, putting miles between us and that terrible place, did I find my voice again. You said my aunt is alive. Where is she? And what were those things? Helen kept her eyes on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Margaret is safe. For now. As for what they are. She sighed heavily. The Watchers of the Void wasn't just some eccentric cult. They found something back in the 1800s. Something old. Something that wasn't meant to be awakened. Like a demon? I asked, trying to make sense of what I'd experienced. Helen laughed, a short, bitter sound. Demons are a human concept. These entities exist beyond our understanding of good and evil. They come from elsewhere, another dimension, perhaps. They've been trying to fully enter our world for centuries, finding human allies to help them. Like my great-grandfather, I said, remembering the journal's references to his research. Helen nodded. Edward Blackwood was deep into it. He spent decades researching the entities, learning their language, performing the rituals they taught him. When he died, your grandmother and Margaret found his research and continued it. At first, out of academic curiosity. Then because they couldn't stop. The entities are persuasive. I thought of the voice beneath the chapel, how it had almost convinced me to open that second door. But Margaret got away. She realized what was happening before it was too late. The man she loved, David, had already been taken. His body used as a vessel. When she saw what they did to him, she reached out to me. I was studying occult history at the university then, and I'd written articles warning about the dangers of certain ritual practices. I helped her disappear, create a new identity. And the others who vanished that summer. Helen's face darkened. Not so fortunate. They were sacrifices. Used to strengthen the entity's hold in our world. I felt sick. And my grandmother? Was she taken? Eleanor made a different choice. She agreed to serve them, to maintain the chamber beneath the chapel, to continue the rituals that kept the entities partially manifested. In exchange, they granted her extended life and certain abilities. But she died, I insisted. 2 months ago. I saw her body. Helen glanced at me, her expression grim. Did you? Or did you see what they wanted you to see? The thing speaking to you down there may not have been your grandmother in any sense you'd recognize, but Eleanor didn't die the way you think she did. We drove in silence for several minutes as I tried to process everything. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me since the Historical Society. If you're the same Helen I met yesterday, how are you, older now? She grimaced. Time distortion. One of their more disorienting weapons. When I realized you were being drawn into this, I tried to follow you, to stop you before you reached the chapel, but they interfered. For me, it's been nearly 20 years since our meeting at the Historical Society. 20 years. I repeated, stunned. But for me, it was yesterday. Be grateful, Helen said darkly. It could have been worse. I've seen people age decades in minutes when exposed directly to the entities. I stared out the window at the passing landscape, trying to anchor myself in reality. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the fields beside the highway. We were heading west, away from the city, into rural areas I wasn't familiar with. Where are we going? I asked. To Margaret. She's been waiting for you, though she didn't know it until recently. Helen checked the rearview mirror nervously. We've maintained a network over the years. People who know about the entities, who help keep them contained. Your grandmother's death, or whatever actually happened to her, has destabilized the barriers. Things are breaking through that haven't been seen in decades. And what does my aunt have to do with me? Why am I involved in this? Helen was quiet for a long moment. Because you're the family archivist, she finally said, just as Margaret was before you. It's not just a hobby or an interest. It's a lineage. The Blackwood family has always had one, someone who preserves the history, maintains the records. The entities recognized that power generations ago. Why do you think your great-grandfather started researching them in the first place? He was guided to them through the family archives. I thought of the journals, photographs, and records I'd so carefully preserved over the years. Had I been playing into their hands all along? What about the tapes? Margaret's recordings? Dangerous, Helen said flatly. They contain sonic patterns that thin the barriers between worlds. Margaret recorded them as evidence, but they're also a form of contagion. The more people who hear them, the stronger the entities become in our world. I remembered the strange pulsing sound on the second tape, how it had made my head ache. I listened to them, I admitted. Or started to. Helen nodded grimly. I know. That's how they found you. How they've been tracking you. Night had fallen completely now. Helen turned off the highway onto a narrow country road, then onto an even narrower dirt track that wound through dense trees. After several minutes, we emerged in a clearing where a small cabin stood, light shining from its windows. We're here, Helen said, stopping the jeep. Margaret is waiting. The cabin door opened as we approached, and an elderly woman stepped onto the porch. She was thin and stooped with age, her white hair pulled back in a simple braid. But her eyes, Her eyes were sharp and clear and hauntingly familiar. "Hello," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you, grandniece." Margaret had aged, of course. She was in her 80s now, but I recognized her from the photographs. The same high cheekbones, the same determined set to her jaw. She'd been hiding for nearly 50 years, believing herself hunted by entities from beyond our world. And now, having seen what I'd seen beneath the chapel, I couldn't dismiss her fears as paranoid delusions. We sat in the cabin's small living room, Margaret watching me intently as Helen prepared tea in the adjoining kitchen. The walls were covered with bookshelves, and I noticed several volumes that looked similar to those I'd seen in the underground study. Research materials, carefully preserved. "You found my journal," Margaret said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "And the tapes?" I started listening to them." She closed her eyes briefly, pained. "I should have destroyed them, but I couldn't bring myself to erase the evidence. I needed someone to know the truth someday." "What is the truth?" I asked quietly. "What are these entities? What do they want?" Margaret exchanged a glance with Helen, who had returned with 3 steaming mugs. "They're ancient," she said slowly. "Older than humanity, older than Earth itself. They exist in a dimension adjacent to ours, separated by barriers that have thinned over time. As for what they want..." She took a deep breath. "They want to fully enter our world. And to do that, they need vessels. Human vessels." "Possession?" I asked, thinking of horror movies and exorcisms. "Not exactly. More like transformation. They reshape humans from within, turning them into something no longer human, but not fully like themselves either. Hybrids capable of existing in both dimensions." Helen set the mugs on a small table. "Your grandmother agreed to a partial transformation. It extended her life, gave her certain abilities, but she remained mostly human, at least outwardly. She became their caretaker, maintaining the rituals that allowed them to maintain a foothold in our world while they gathered strength." I thought of the voice beneath the chapel, how it had started as my grandmother's before transforming into something inhuman. "And now she's gone," Margaret said. "Fully transformed or destroyed. We don't know which. Either way, the pact she maintained has been broken. The entities are attempting to break through completely. Using me," I added, remembering what Helen had said in the car. "They wanted to use me to open that door." Margaret nodded sadly. "You're the new archivist, the keeper of family memories. They've always been drawn to that role, the power of preservation, of deciding what history survives and what is forgotten." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But you're also something they didn't anticipate. You're both Eleanor's grandchild and my great-niece. You have a connection to both sides of this conflict." "What does that mean?" I asked. "What am I supposed to do?" "You have a choice," Helen said, sitting down beside Margaret. "One that neither Eleanor nor Margaret truly had 50 years ago. You can help us seal the entities away permanently, or at least for another generation. Or I can open the door," I finished. "Let them through." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her tea. "The journal and tapes you found were only part of what I left behind. There was another box, one I hid separately, knowing Eleanor would search the house after I disappeared." I frowned. There were 27 boxes in the attic. I went through all of them. "Not in the attic. In the root cellar, behind the north wall, there's a loose stone. Behind it, you'll find a metal box containing the rest of my research, including the ritual to seal the breach permanently." I set down my mug, my mind racing. "We have to go back to the house." Helen nodded grimly. "It's the only way. The ritual must be performed at the site of the breach, beneath the chapel." "But the entrance collapsed," I protested. "We can't get back down there." "There are other ways in," Margaret said. The chamber system extends beneath much of what was once the Blackwood property. There's another entrance through the old well on the east side of the estate, now probably somewhere in that suburban development. I thought of the neighborhood built atop the Blackwood land. Normal people living their lives, unaware of what existed beneath their homes. And if we do this ritual, what happens? Margaret and Helen exchanged another look. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Finally, Margaret spoke. The ritual requires a sacrifice, she said quietly. A willing one. Someone with a blood connection to those who originally opened the breach. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You mean one of us has to die? Yes, Margaret said simply. And it should be me. I'm old. I've lived my life in hiding. It's time I finished what I started 50 years ago. No, Helen interjected forcefully. We've discussed this. You're the only one who knows the ritual completely. It has to be me. You're not blood, Margaret reminded her. It wouldn't work. They both looked at me then, and I understood the unspoken third option. I was Blackwood blood, too, both through my grandmother Eleanor and through Margaret herself, who was my great-aunt. There has to be another way, I said, my voice barely audible. Margaret reached out, taking my hand in her papery, aged 1. There isn't. But the choice of who makes the sacrifice is still open. And you have another choice as well, whether to help us at all. What do you mean? Her grip tightened. The entities will offer you things. Power, knowledge, extended life, like they gave Eleanor. The ability to see beyond the limitations of human perception. These aren't empty promises. They can deliver what they offer. I was tempted myself, all those years ago. I thought of the voice beneath the chapel. How compelling it had been. How part of me had wanted to open that second door despite my fear. Why didn't you accept? I asked. Because I saw what they did to David, Margaret replied, her voice breaking slightly. How they hollowed him out from within, replaced everything that made him human with something else. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late for him. Nearly too late for me. Helen stood up, moving to a desk in the corner. She returned with a leather-bound book, similar to the journal I'd found, but larger. We should begin preparing. The summer solstice is in 3 days, the optimal time to perform the sealing ritual. 3 days, I repeated. But I need time to think, to process all this. We don't have time, Helen said grimly. With each passing hour, the breach widens. Already, there are signs. She picked up a tablet from the coffee table and handed it to me. On the screen was a news article dated that morning. Mysterious illness affects Oakwood Heights residents. Authorities baffled. The article described dozens of people in the suburban development experiencing symptoms including migraine-like headaches, auditory and visual hallucinations, and in severe cases, seizures and coma. The CDC had been called in, searching for an environmental contaminant or infectious agent. It's beginning, Margaret said softly. Just like in 1975. First the headaches, then the visions, then the transformations. Except this time, without Eleanor maintaining the barriers, it will spread much faster. I set down the tablet, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day, the underground chamber, the voice claiming to be my grandmother, the revelations about my family's dark legacy, had left me drained. I need to sleep, I said. Just give me tonight to think. Margaret nodded. Of course. There's a bedroom through that door. But please, don't take too long to decide. Lives depend on it. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed and more bookshelves lining the walls. I lay down, fully clothed, certain I wouldn't be able to sleep despite my exhaustion. Yet, darkness claimed me almost immediately, pulling me down into dreams. I dreamed of the chamber beneath the chapel, but larger now, cathedral-like in its dimensions. The walls were covered in shifting symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. In the center stood my grandmother, Eleanor, but not as I had known her in life. Her skin was translucent, revealing a network of glowing veins beneath. Her eyes were entirely black, reflecting no light. "Join us," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Become what you were always meant to be. The final archivist, preserving not just the past, but all of reality." Behind her, the second door, the one I hadn't opened, stood ajar. Now, beyond it, I glimpsed impossible geometries, spaces that folded in on themselves in ways that defied physics, and moving within those spaces, vast shapes that seemed to shift and change whenever I tried to focus on them. "What are you?" I asked the thing wearing my grandmother's form. "We are the Watchers," it replied. "The keepers of memory, the preservers of all that is and will be. We existed before your world took shape, and we will exist long after it crumbles to dust. We offer you a place among us, beyond death, beyond time." "At what cost?" Eleanor smiled, her teeth too sharp, too numerous. "Only what you no longer need. Your humanity. A small price for immortality, for knowledge beyond comprehension." I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding. The bedroom was dark, but a sliver of moonlight came through the curtains, illuminating a figure sitting in the corner. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was the thing from my dream, the not Eleanor with her black eyes and sharp teeth. But it was Margaret, watching me with a sad expression. "They reached you in your dreams," she said. "I was afraid they might." I sat up, pushing sweat-dampened hair from my face. "Is that how it happens? Through dreams? It's one way. There are others." She leaned forward. "What did they offer you?" "Knowledge. Immortality." I swallowed hard. "They said I could be the final archivist." Margaret nodded. "They offered me similar things. The opportunity to preserve not just my family's history, but all of history. To witness the past firsthand, to ensure nothing was ever forgotten. A tempting offer for someone who values preservation." I admitted, "Yes, but what they don't tell you is that you become a mere vessel for their memories, not your own. You preserve, but you lose yourself in the process." She stood up, moving to sit beside me on the bed. "I've spent 50 years fighting them, hiding from them. I won't pretend it's been easy. There have been times I've regretted my choice. Wondered if I should have accepted their offer. What stopped you from giving in?" She was silent for a long moment. "Love," she finally said. "Love for the people who would suffer if the entities broke through completely. Love for the human world, with all its flaws and limitations. And eventually, love for the family I never got to know, including you." I felt tears welling in my eyes. "I never knew you existed." "Not really. You were just a name no one mentioned, a family secret. Eleanor made sure of that. She wanted to protect you, in her way. Keep you ignorant of your heritage, your potential role." Margaret took my hand. "But she also preserved my journal, my recordings. Part of her, the human part, wanted the truth to survive. And now I have to decide whether to help seal these entities away, knowing it will cost one of us our life." Margaret squeezed my hand. "Yes. But remember, if we don't act, the cost will be much higher. What's happening in Oakwood Heights is just the beginning." I thought of the news article, the mysterious illness affecting dozens of people. How many more would suffer if the breach continued to widen? Hundreds? Thousands? And one of the transformations Margaret had mentioned, humans being remade from within, turned into something no longer human. "I'll help," I said finally. "But I don't accept that one of us has to die. There has to be another way." Margaret's expression was gentle but firm. "I've spent 50 years searching for one. There isn't." The next morning, preparations began in earnest. Helen spread maps of the Oakwood Heights development across the kitchen table, identifying where the old well had been located on the Blackwood estate. According to her calculations, it now sat beneath a community garden at the center of the neighborhood. "We'll need to wait until nightfall to access it," she said. "Less chance of being seen." Meanwhile, Margaret began instructing me on the ritual that would seal the breach. It was complex, involving specific movements, phrases in a language I didn't recognize, and the arrangement of certain objects in a precise pattern around the central chamber where the breach was located. "The most important element is this," she said, showing me a small stone tablet covered in symbols similar to those I'd seen in the underground chamber. "It's a key of sorts, but for closing a door rather than opening one. It must be placed on the altar in the central chamber at the exact moment of the sacrifice." I took the tablet, running my fingers over the strange symbols. "And the sacrifice itself? What does that entail?" Margaret hesitated. "A willing surrender of life force. The blood of a Blackwood, freely given, will power the sealing." "You mean suicide?" I said flatly. "No, not exactly." She looked uncomfortable. "The ritual itself draws the life force out. The person doesn't harm themselves directly." I set down the tablet, suddenly nauseated. "This is insane. We're talking about human sacrifice like it's a reasonable solution." "It's not reasonable," Helen interjected from the table. "None of this is reasonable. We're dealing with entities that exist beyond human reason, beyond our understanding of reality itself." I paced the small cabin, trying to process everything. Part of me still couldn't believe this was happening, that I had gone from sorting through my grandmother's belongings to contemplating a ritual involving human sacrifice in just a few days. Yet, I couldn't deny what I had seen beneath the chapel, the voice that had called to me, the dreams that had invaded my sleep. "There's something I don't understand," I said, turning back to Margaret. "If sealing the breach requires a Blackwood sacrifice, how are you planning to do this without me? You said you've been preparing for years." Margaret and Helen exchanged a look. "We weren't," Helen admitted. "We've been maintaining smaller containment rituals, keeping the entities partially confined, but never fully sealed away. For the complete sealing, we needed." "You needed me," I finished. "Another Blackwood." "Not just any Blackwood," Margaret said quietly. "The family archivist. The one who would find my journal, my recordings. The one who would seek the truth." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You've been waiting for me all these years." Margaret nodded. "I've watched your family from a distance, watched you grow up, develop your interest in preservation and history. When you became a museum conservator, I knew it would be you. You've been manipulating me," I said, anger rising. "Setting me up for this moment." "No," Margaret replied firmly. "I've been hoping. There's a difference. I never contacted you, never influenced your choices directly. I simply waited. And prepared." Helen rolled up the maps. "We should gather the remaining materials for the ritual, and we need to retrieve the box from the root cellar at Eleanor's house." I had almost forgotten about the hidden box Margaret had mentioned, the one containing the rest of her research. "Is it still there? After all these years?" "I sealed it with protections," Margaret said. "Eleanor wouldn't have been able to find it even if she suspected it existed. And the entities can't touch it directly. It contains certain artifacts they find repellent." "We'll need to split up," Helen said. "I'll go to Oakwood Heights. Scout the location of the well entrance. Margaret, you should stay here. You're still too vulnerable to their influence if you get too close to the breach." "And me?" I asked. "You need to return to Eleanor's house," Margaret said. "Retrieve the box from the root cellar. But be careful. The house may not be empty anymore." "What do you mean?" "Eleanor maintained that house as a buffer zone, a place halfway between our world and theirs. With her gone, they may have claimed it entirely." She went to a drawer and removed a small cloth pouch. "Take this. It contains herbs and minerals that repel their influence. Keep it with you at all times. I took the pouch, feeling ridiculous, even as a part of me recognized the seriousness of the situation. How will I know if they're there? Trust your instincts, Helen said grimly. If something feels wrong, too quiet, too still, too perfect, get out immediately. We agreed to meet back at the cabin by nightfall, then perform the ritual at midnight, when the breach would be at its most vulnerable. As I prepared to leave, Margaret embraced me suddenly, her thin arms surprisingly strong. Whatever happens, she whispered, know that I'm proud of you. You're everything I hoped the next family archivist would be. I returned to Eleanor's house in the late afternoon. The street was quiet, normal-looking, nothing to suggest that something ancient and inhuman might be lurking within the Victorian structure. I parked a block away, remembering Helen's warning that my car might be watched. The house key was still on my keyring. I approached cautiously, every sense alert for anything unusual. The front garden looked slightly overgrown after 2 months of neglect, but otherwise everything appeared ordinary. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent and dim, curtains still drawn from when I'd locked up days earlier. Dust motes danced in the stray beams of sunlight that penetrated the gloom. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. Moving quietly, I made my way to the kitchen and the door that led down to the root cellar. It creaked as I opened it, a normal, mundane sound that nevertheless made me jump. Steep wooden stairs. A soft laugh echoed down the stairs. Are you so sure? Eleanor is part of us now. As we are part of her. Her memories, her feelings for you, they remain. A figure began to descend the stairs slowly, a silhouette that resembled my grandmother in outline but moved with an unnatural fluidity, as if its joints worked differently than a human's. Stay back, I warned, backing away until I hit the far wall. I'm not opening any doors for you. The figure paused halfway down the stairs, still mostly in shadow. You've been speaking with Margaret, it said, a note of displeasure in its voice. She's filled your head with lies. Half-truths, at best. She doesn't understand what we offer, what your grandmother willingly embraced. And what's that? I asked, playing for time as I edged toward the corner where a second set of stairs led up to an outside entrance, an old coal chute, now converted to a cellar door. Preservation, the thing said simply. Isn't that what you want? What you've always wanted? To preserve the past, to ensure nothing is forgotten. It took another step down, and light fell across its face. I stifled a gasp. It looked like my grandmother, her features, her silver hair. But the eyes were solid black, and the skin had a translucent quality, like wax that had begun to melt. We preserve everything, it continued. Every moment, every memory, every incarnation of reality. Nothing is ever truly lost to us. Your grandmother understood this. She gave herself to us so that nothing would be forgotten. I reached the corner, my hand finding the railing of the second staircase. And the price? What did she give up? The thing smiled, revealing too many teeth. Merely her limited human perspective. A small price for immortality, for knowledge beyond comprehension. It echoed the words from my dream. Exactly. I'm not interested, I said, taking the first step up the escape stairs. Find someone else to be your vessel. Its smile faded. There is no one else. You are the archivist now, the keeper of memories, the preserver of what was and what will be. It descended another step. And you've already begun the transformation. The dreams, the visions, the connection to what lies beneath the chapel. A chill ran through me. It was right. I had dreamed of the entities, heard their call. Was I already compromised? The box you've taken, it said, gesturing toward my backpack. It contains lies. Margaret's desperate attempt to deny her true nature, her true purpose. If you use what's in that box, you'll destroy everything. Including yourself. My hand tightened on the railing. Better that than becoming like you. The thing's face contorted, momentarily losing its resemblance to my grandmother entirely. For an instant, I glimpsed something else beneath the human disguise, something composed of angles and geometries that hurt my eyes to look at. "You cannot escape your heritage," it hissed, its voice no longer human. "You cannot escape us. We are in your blood, in your dreams, in your very cells. The transformation has already begun." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran up the stairs, throwing my weight against the cellar doors at the top. They burst open, spilling me out onto the side yard of the house. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not looking back, not stopping until I was blocks away. Only then did I pause, leaning against a tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced back toward the house, half expecting to see the thing that wore my grandmother's face pursuing me, but the street remained quiet, normal. I checked my phone. It was nearly 6 o'clock, still a few hours before I was to meet Helen and Margaret at the cabin. The box felt heavy in my backpack, its contents potentially the key to stopping the entities from breaking through completely. But the thing's words echoed in my mind. "You'll destroy everything, including yourself." Was it telling the truth? Was Margaret's ritual as dangerous as it claimed? I found a coffee shop a few blocks away and sequestered myself in a back corner. With shaking hands, I removed the journal from the box and began to read. Unlike the first journal, which had documented the initial discovery and excavation beneath the chapel, this one contained Margaret's research after she realized what they had truly found. Pages of historical references to the entities throughout human history, appearing under different names in different cultures, but always with the same distinctive symbol, the eye within a circle. According to Margaret's research, the entities had been attempting to break through into our world for millennia, finding human allies to help them. The Watchers of the Void cult in the late 1800s had been just one of many such groups throughout history. Most disturbing were Margaret's notes about the transformation process. How humans who served the entities gradually changed, physically and mentally. I quickly gathered what I needed: the journal, the artifacts from the bundle, the stone tablet Margaret had shown me earlier. As I was about to leave, my phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello." I answered cautiously. "It's Helen," came the strained voice on the other end. "Where are you?" "At the cabin." "Where are you?" "Where's Margaret?" A pause. "Margaret's not with me." "She's not at the cabin." "No, there's a note saying you both went to the breach." Helen cursed under her breath. "It's a trap. She's gone to perform the ritual alone. She thinks she can seal the breach with her own sacrifice." "But you said she was the only one who knew the ritual completely," I protested. "I lied. We both know it. We were trying to protect you, I suppose." Helen's voice was tight with worry. "Listen carefully. Margaret believes she can seal the breach permanently by offering a greater sacrifice than the ritual requires. Not just her life, but her soul. If she does this, she won't just die. She'll be trapped with the entities forever. We have to stop her," I said, already moving toward the door. "I'm at the well entrance now," Helen replied. "Meet me here as quickly as you can. And bring the artifacts from the box. All of them. We'll need them." I drove recklessly fast down the country roads, the box of artifacts secure in my backpack. Night had fallen completely by the time I reached Oakwood Heights. The suburban streets were eerily quiet. The community garden where the well entrance was located was deserted, surrounded by a simple chain-link fence that I easily climbed. Helen was waiting beside what looked like an old stone well, its opening covered by a modern metal grate. "Help me with this," she said without preamble, already working to remove the heavy grate. Together, we managed to slide it aside, revealing a dark opening below. A metal ladder had been attached to the inner wall of the well, descending into darkness. "Margaret's already down there," Helen said, switching on a powerful flashlight. "She has about a 20-minute head start on us. The ritual can only be performed at the central chamber, the heart of the breach. We might still have time to stop her." I followed Helen down the ladder, the metal rungs cold beneath my fingers. The well shaft extended about 30 feet before opening into a horizontal tunnel, clearly not natural, but carved from the bedrock with precision. The tunnel sloped gently downward, leading us deeper beneath the suburb. "How long have you known Margaret?" I asked as we hurried through the passage, our flashlight beams dancing ahead of us. "Since 1975, Helen replied. I was a research assistant at the university then, studying occult history. Margaret came to me after she realized what they'd found beneath the chapel. She was desperate for information, for a way to fight them. And you've been helping her hide all these years." Helen nodded. "Among other things. We've built a network. People who know about the entities, who help keep them contained. Most don't know the full truth, just enough to recognize the signs of breakthrough and report them." The tunnel branched, and Helen took the right fork without hesitation. "This way leads to the central chamber. Margaret will be heading there." "I found something in the journal," I said, keeping pace with her. "About a point of origin, the original breach point. Margaret thought it might be important." Helen glanced at me. "It is. That's where the ritual must be performed to be effective. The central chamber contains that point, a place where the barriers between dimensions are naturally thin. The chapel was built over it deliberately to contain and channel the energies there." We continued in silence for several minutes, the tunnel gradually widening until it opened into a larger chamber, clearly man-made, with carved walls and a vaulted ceiling. This wasn't the natural cave system I had expected, but something far more deliberate and ancient. "Unexpected, isn't it?" Helen said, seeing my surprise. "Not from the 1970s. Much older. The Watchers cult didn't discover this place. They reclaimed it. These chambers were first carved over 1,000 years ago. The implications were staggering. How long had the entities been attempting to break through? How many generations of humans had they influenced, manipulated? Beyond this first chamber was another, and then another, a complex of interconnected rooms, some bearing faded carvings or the remains of long-abandoned equipment. We moved quickly through them, Helen leading the way with confidence born of familiarity. "You've been here before," I realized. "Many times. Margaret and I have been maintaining smaller containment rituals here for decades, reinforcing the barriers where we could." Finally, we reached a set of stone steps leading downward. At the bottom was an ornate archway carved with symbols similar to those I'd seen in Margaret's journal. Beyond it lay darkness, but not the ordinary darkness of an unlit room. This darkness seemed to shift and move, almost pulsating with its own inner light. "The central chamber," Helen whispered. "Margaret will be in there." We descended the steps cautiously. As we passed through the archway, our flashlights dimmed, then failed completely, but we could still see. The chamber was illuminated by a sickly green glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The space was enormous, far larger than seemed possible given the chambers we had passed through to reach it. The ceiling soared upward, lost in shadows despite the green luminescence that filled the air. The walls curved in ways that made my eyes hurt to follow them, creating an impression of impossible geometries. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, ancient, weathered, covered in the same symbols I had seen throughout the journals and the underground spaces. And kneeling before it was Margaret, her hands raised above her head, her voice chanting in a language I didn't recognize. "Margaret!" I called out, rushing toward her. "Stop!" She turned, her eyes wide with surprise and dismay. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Either of you. Go back. It's the only way." "There's another way," I insisted, reaching her side. "We found something in your research about the point of origin. We can seal it permanently without sacrifice." Margaret shook her head sadly. "No. I've tried for 50 years to find another solution. There isn't one. The breach must be sealed, and it requires Blackwood blood. Better mine than yours. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. And what about the next time? I demanded. When the barriers weaken again in another generation? Will my children have to make this same choice? They won't have to, Margaret said firmly. That's why I'm doing this, not just offering my life, but my entire being. It will seal the breach permanently. Helen stepped forward. You don't know that, Margaret. It's just a theory. The entities could be lying to you, manipulating you into giving them exactly what they want, a direct connection to your consciousness. Margaret hesitated, doubt crossing her face. Before she could respond, the green glow intensified, pulsing in rhythm with a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They're coming, Helen said urgently. The barriers are failing. We need to perform the ritual now, before it's too late. Margaret rose to her feet, her expression resolute. Then let me finish what I started. Please. I've carried this burden for 50 years. Let me end it. I looked at this woman, my great-aunt, a person I'd only just met but felt connected to in ways I couldn't fully explain. She had sacrificed her entire life to fighting these entities, to protecting a world that never knew the danger it faced. She deserved peace. But something about this felt wrong. The entities wanted a sacrifice. Craved it, even. What if the entire ritual was just another form of manipulation? Wait, I said, pulling the journal from my backpack. Before we do anything, I want to understand exactly what we're doing and why. No more secrets. No more half-truths. The humming grew louder, the green light pulsating more rapidly. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift and warp, stretching in impossible ways. We don't have time, Helen urged. The breach is widening. Make time, I insisted, flipping through the journal to the pages I'd noticed earlier, Margaret's theories about the entity's true purpose. What if the sacrifice is exactly what they want? What if the ritual itself is their creation, designed to give them access to human consciousness? Margaret stared at me. That's possible, she admitted. I've wondered about that myself. But what alternative do we have? If we do nothing, they break through entirely. I turned to the maps I'd found in the box, spreading them on the altar. You marked a point of origin, the exact spot where the breach first occurred. Where is it? Margaret pointed to the altar itself. Directly beneath this stone. It's a thin spot between dimensions, a place where our reality and theirs naturally touch. I examined the altar more closely. The stone was carved with intricate symbols, including the now familiar eye within a circle. But there was something else, a small indentation in the center, roughly the size and shape of the black stone with the natural eye pattern that I'd found in Margaret's bundle. This stone, I said, pulling it from my backpack. It fits here, doesn't it? Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, it's part of the ritual. The stone focuses the energies of the sacrifice, directing them to seal the breach. But what if it's not meant to focus a sacrifice at all? I suggested, an idea forming. What if it's a key? Not to open or close a door, but to lock one that's already closed. I placed the stone in the indentation. It fit perfectly, settling into place with a soft click. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone began to glow with a blue light that contrasted sharply with the sickly green illumination of the chamber. The humming changed pitch, becoming more urgent, almost angry. The walls trembled, dust and small stones raining down from the ceiling. What's happening? Helen demanded, grabbing my arm. I don't know, I admitted. But I think we've interrupted their plans somehow. Margaret was staring at the altar, her expression changing from confusion to dawning realization. The ritual, as I understood it, calls for blood to be spilled upon the altar, feeding the stone, powering the ceiling. She looked up at me. But what if the stone itself contains power? What if it's not a conduit, but a source? The blue light from the stone was spreading, flowing along the carved symbols on the altar like water finding channels. Where it touched, the green glow receded, seemingly pushed back. The pendant, Margaret said suddenly. The silver shield pendant from the bundle. It's not just a symbol. It's part of this. I quickly retrieved the pendant, holding it uncertainly. What do I do with it? Place it on the altar, near the stone, Margaret instructed, her voice gaining confidence. The shield protects against their influence. It always has. I did as she suggested, placing the silver pendant beside the black stone. The blue light immediately enveloped it, growing stronger, more intense. The humming changed again, becoming a high-pitched keening that made my teeth ache. The final piece, Margaret said, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. The key. The dark metal key from the bundle. It's not for any physical lock. It's symbolic. A key to lock them away. With trembling hands, I placed the key on the altar, completing a triangle with the stone and pendant. The blue light flared, blindingly bright, forcing us to shield our eyes. The keening rose to an unbearable pitch, then cut off abruptly. When we could see again, the green glow was gone. The chamber was illuminated only by the steady blue light emanating from the 3 artifacts on the altar. The walls had stopped shifting, settling back into normal, comprehensible geometries. What did we do? I asked, my voice hushed. Margaret laughed, a sound of genuine joy and disbelief. We locked them out. Not with blood or sacrifice, but with their own tools turned against them. She touched the black stone reverently. This isn't just a focus for the ritual. It's a piece of their world, a fragment that crossed over naturally. And these, she indicated the pendant and key, are human creations designed to interact with it. Together, they form a barrier the entities can't cross. Helen was examining the walls of the chamber with her flashlight, which was working again. The symbols are changing, she reported with astonishment. Rearranging themselves. She was right. The carved symbols that covered the walls were shifting, flowing like liquid, reforming into new patterns. As we watched, they settled into a configuration none of us recognized, except for one. The eye within a circle had transformed. The pupil was now crossed by a bar. A locked eye. It's over, Margaret breathed. After all these years, it's finally over. But I wasn't convinced. Is it? How do we know this will hold? That they won't find another way through? We don't, Margaret admitted. Not with absolute certainty. But I think this is what I was meant to find all along. Not a ritual of sacrifice, but one of transformation, turning their own connection to our world into a permanent barrier. We gathered the artifacts from the altar, knowing they should never be separated again. Together, they formed a lock that kept the entities confined to their own dimension. The breach was sealed, not by blood or death, but by understanding and repurposing the very tools the entities had provided for their own liberation. As we made our way back through the chambers and tunnels, I felt a weight lifting, not just from my shoulders, but from my family line. The curse of the Blackwoods, the obligation that had bound my grandmother and great-aunt to these entities, was broken. What happens now? I asked as we emerged from the well into the quiet community garden. The night was peaceful, stars visible above despite the suburban light pollution. Now, Margaret smiled, looking truly at peace for the first time since I'd met her. Now we document everything. We preserve the truth, but keep it safe from those who might misuse it. She squeezed my hand. That's what archivists do, after all. I nodded, understanding my role in a new light. Not just preserving my family's history, but protecting the world from dangers hidden within that history. A responsibility, yes, but not a curse. A choice freely made. And the people in Oakwood Heights? I asked, thinking of the mysterious illness that had been spreading. Will they recover? Helen nodded. The influence is broken. They should return to normal within days, with no memory of what affected them. The human mind is remarkably adept at forgetting what it cannot comprehend. We returned to the cabin, where Margaret and I spent hours organizing her research, creating a comprehensive record of everything we had learned about the entities and how we had sealed the breach. This would be preserved, but hidden away, not in an attic or root cellar, but in a secure location only the three of us would know about. As dawn broke, casting golden light through the cabin windows, Margaret handed me a small wooden box. Inside was the black stone, the silver pendant, and the dark metal key, the three artifacts that had sealed the breach. "These belong to you now," she said. "The new Archivist. Keep them separate. Keep them safe. They should never be brought near the breach site again." I accepted the box, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. "I will." In the months that followed, life returned to something resembling normalcy. I completed my work at my grandmother's house, distributing heirlooms to family members and preparing the property for sale. The underground chambers beneath Oakwood Heights were sealed more conventionally with concrete and steel, funded by a historical preservation grant Helen helped arrange. Margaret emerged from hiding, creating a new identity with Helen's help. To the world, she was simply an elderly distant relative who had reconnected with family. To me, she was a mentor, teaching me the true meaning of preservation, not just of objects and documents, but of knowledge, of truth, of the barriers between worlds. I returned to my job at the museum with a new perspective on the artifacts I helped conserve. Each had a story, a purpose, a history that extended beyond its physical form. As family archivist, I had learned to see beyond the surface, to recognize the power of objects and the memories they contained. The box with the three artifacts remains with me always, a reminder of what lies beneath the surface of our world and what it took to keep it there. I still dream sometimes of the chamber beneath the chapel, of the green glow and impossible geometries. But these dreams no longer frighten me. They remind me of what was prevented, what was preserved. I was the family archivist. I opened the last box. And in doing so, I closed a door that should never have been opened. But sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, I wonder, did we truly seal the breach forever? Or did we merely lock a door to which someone, somewhere, might still possess the key? The entities were patient, after all. They could wait generations if necessary.